My name is Claire Navarro. I'm 32 years old. After 9 years of marriage, my husband walked out and moved in with his boss's daughter, a woman whose father owned half the commercial real estate in Phoenix. In one afternoon, everything I had built quietly and carefully for almost a decade just disappeared. The house was in his name. The savings account we shared had been quietly drained over the months before he left, and the divorce lawyer I hired used up the last of what I had managed to set aside on my own. I wasn't just broke. I was starting over with a 7-year-old daughter, a 2-bedroom apartment I could no longer afford, and a resume that hadn't been updated in 3 years because I'd been the one who stayed home, the one who made it possible for him to work late and travel and climb. I did all of that willingly. I don't say it with bitterness. I say it because it matters. Because it's the reason I had almost nothing left when he decided I wasn't enough anymore. My daughter, Lily, started 2nd grade that September. I remember sitting at the kitchen table the night before her first day, looking at the school supply list and doing the math in my head. Crayons, folders, a new backpack because hers had a broken zipper. $43. I had $61 in my checking account and rent due in 11 days. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I dropped Lily off at school, drove home, sat in the parking lot of our apartment complex, and opened my laptop. I typed in every job search term I could think of: receptionist, administrative assistant, retail, food service, anything full-time with benefits. And then I saw a listing that stopped me cold: live-in caregiver needed, private residence, competitive salary plus full room and board, immediate start. The salary they listed was more than I had made in my last job before I left the workforce. The description said the position was for an elderly man, a retired businessman who had been experiencing what they called significant behavioral instability. It said most candidates did not last past the first week. It said the household was located in Scottsdale, in a gated community. I stared at that listing for a long time. My mother lived 40 minutes away in Mesa. She had offered more than once to have Lily stay with her if I ever needed the help. She meant it. She was the kind of woman who meant everything she said. I called her that afternoon. She didn't hesitate for even a second. 2 days later, I drove through a set of iron gates and up a stone driveway toward a house that looked less like someone's home and more like a photograph from a magazine. Pale stucco walls, terracotta roof tiles, mature saguaros flanking the front entrance. I sat in my car for a moment before getting out, took a breath, and told myself, "You are here for Lily. That is the only reason you need." A woman opened the front door before I even reached the step. She was around 40, polished in that deliberate way that takes effort to make look effortless. Silk blouse, tailored slacks, hair blown out perfectly at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. "You must be Claire," she said. Not a question. "Yes, thank you for having me in. I'm Serena Walsh. Mr. Walsh is my father." She stepped back to let me inside. The entryway alone was larger than my apartment's living room. "Before we go any further, I want to be honest with you about what you're walking into." "I appreciate that," I said. She began walking and I followed. Her heels made a clean, precise sound on the tile floor. My father was one of the most respected men in the development industry in the state for 40 years. He built this house. He built 4 others. He built a company that employs over 200 people. She paused at the end of a hallway. In the past 18 months, his mental state has deteriorated significantly. He becomes agitated without warning. He has thrown objects at staff. He has accused people in this house of things that are not happening. She turned to look at me directly. 3 caregivers have quit in the last 4 months. "What made them leave?" I asked. "One left after he threw a ceramic lamp across the room on her 2nd day. One couldn't handle the verbal outbursts. The third," she paused briefly, "said she didn't feel safe." I nodded slowly. I thought about Lily, her little backpack, the school supply list, $43. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. Serena studied me the way you study something you're not sure you trust yet. Then she nodded once and opened the door at the end of the hall. The room was large and sun-filled, with tall windows looking out over a desert garden. An old man sat in a leather recliner near the window, staring out at the yard. His hair was white and disheveled. His hands, resting on the arms of the chair, trembled faintly. He looked smaller than I expected for a man whose house was this size. The moment he heard us enter, he turned. "Who is that?" he said sharply. "Dad, this is Claire. She's going to be." "I didn't ask for anyone." His voice was loud and sudden, like a door slamming. "I have told you, I do not want strangers in this house." Serena closed her eyes briefly, the way people do when they've heard something too many times. "Claire is here to help, Dad. I don't need help." He reached for the glass of water on the table beside him, and I thought for a moment he was going to drink it. Instead, he picked it up and hurled it sideways. It shattered against the baseboard with a sound like a small explosion. Neither Serena nor I moved. There was a long silence. I walked over, crouched down, and began picking up the larger pieces of glass. "Leave it," he said roughly. "I will in just a second," I said, without looking up. "I just don't want anyone stepping on it." He didn't say anything else. When I stood up and turned to face him, he was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not rage anymore. Something closer to suspicion. "I'm not here to bother you," I told him. "I'll stay out of your way as much as you want, but I'm going to be around." He turned back to the window without responding. Serena caught my eye in the doorway and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, like that was the best outcome she'd seen in months. She spent the next hour walking me through the medication schedule, 3 prescriptions, twice daily, the daily routines, the layout of the house. My room was on the ground floor, near the back of the house. It was clean and quiet, with a window that looked out over the garden. I sat on the edge of the bed after she left and called my mom, then asked to talk to Lily. "Are you coming home tomorrow, Mommy?" "Not tomorrow, baby. But I'll see you on the weekend, and I'll call you every night before bed, okay?" "Okay," she said, and then, "I love you." "I love you more than anything in the whole world," I told her. "You know that, right?" "I know," she said. I hung up and sat there for a little while before I made myself unpack. That night, around 9:30, I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The house was still. The lights in the main living area were low, and I moved quietly so as not to disturb Mr. Walsh if he was already asleep. I was halfway through the living room when I heard voices coming from the direction of the back sitting room. Male voices. Laughter. I stopped. Something about that laugh made my stomach turn before I even understood why. It was too familiar. It lived somewhere in my muscle memory, in the part of me that had spent 9 years learning all the sounds a person makes. The way they clear their throat, the way they laugh when they're performing for someone, the way they say your name like a period at the end of a sentence instead of something warm. I stepped forward slowly, and the man standing near the bar cart turned around. For a second, I couldn't breathe. It was my ex-husband, Nathan. He looked the same. Maybe a little heavier. He was holding a glass of bourbon and wearing the kind of casual clothes that cost more than they look like they cost. He saw my face change before I could stop it, and a slow smile spread across his. "Well," he said, "this is unexpected." I couldn't speak. He looked me over the way you look over something that amuses you. "Claire, wow." He took a sip of his drink. "You're working here." "I'm the live-in caregiver," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Caregiver." He let the word sit there. Then he smiled wider. "So you're basically the help." My hands went cold. He swirled his glass and looked around the room with the easy confidence of someone who believes he belongs wherever he stands. "Serena and I have been together almost a year now. Her dad's place is basically a second home at this point." He paused. "Wild, right? Small world." I said nothing. "How's," he started, like he was going to ask about Lily, and then something in his face shifted and he didn't finish the sentence. "She's fine," I said quietly. "Good." He set his glass down on the bar cart. "Look, this doesn't have to be weird. You do your job. I stay out of your way. Easy. He smiled again. Although I have to say, it's a little funny, isn't it? You used to be my wife. Now you're working in my girlfriend's house. He tilted his head. Life has a sense of humor. He walked past me toward the hallway and stopped at the base of the stairs. Get some rest, Claire. The old man is going to be a handful tomorrow. Then he went upstairs. I stood in the middle of that living room for a long time. Part of me, a very loud, very exhausted part of me, wanted to walk out the front door, get in my car, and drive straight to my mother's house, and hold my daughter and never come back. But the other part, the part that had been doing math on school supply lists and rent payments and parking lots at 7 in the morning, knew I couldn't. I went back to my room. I didn't sleep much. I want to be honest about the next few weeks, because it wasn't like something from a movie. It was hard. Mr. Walsh was difficult in the way that proud people become difficult when they feel like they've lost control of their own life. He shouted. He refused meals. He knocked a tray out of my hands once and then looked genuinely startled by what he'd done. I didn't yell back. I didn't walk out. I just cleaned it up and came back the next morning. Nathan appeared at the house 3 or 4 times a week. Every time he saw me, he found a way to say something. Once, in front of a couple they had over for dinner, he laughed and said, "She used to be married to me, actually. Funny how things work out." The woman across the table gave me a look of such naked pity that I had to excuse myself to the kitchen. I kept my face still. I kept showing up. And then, about 3 weeks in, something shifted with Mr. Walsh. It happened gradually. He started accepting water when I brought it without telling me to leave it on the table. One morning, he didn't protest when I helped him with his morning medications. One afternoon, I found him struggling to reach a book on a high shelf, and I got it for him without being asked. And he said, "Thank you," quietly, like it cost him something to say it. Small things. But I noticed them. And then one Tuesday, I remember it was a Tuesday because I had just gotten off the phone with Lily about her school's upcoming fall festival. 2 doctors arrived at the house. They went directly to Mr. Walsh's room with Serena. The door was closed for nearly 40 minutes. When they left, I went in to check on him. He was worse. Noticeably worse. Agitated in a way he hadn't been in days. He knocked his lunch tray to the floor before I could set it down. He shouted things that didn't make sense. The small progress we'd made felt like it had simply evaporated. That night, I was walking back from the kitchen, past the study, when I noticed the door was ajar and I heard Serena's voice, low and careful. "The dosage increase is working," she said. "He's more confused than he was last month." And Nathan's voice, "How long before you can move forward with the petition?" A pause. Then Serena, "The doctors think maybe 6 more weeks. Once they formally assess him as unable to manage his own affairs, I can file for conservatorship. Everything transfers to my management. The company, the properties, all of it." Nathan laughed softly. 6 weeks. I didn't move. I stood in the dark hallway with my back against the wall and my heart slamming so hard I was certain they could hear it. The dosage increase is working. I went back to my room and sat on my bed for a long time. The next morning, when I went in to help Mr. Walsh with breakfast, something unexpected happened. He was sitting in the recliner near the window, and when I came in, he turned and looked at me. Not through me the way he sometimes did, not past me. Directly at me, with a clarity I hadn't seen in his eyes before. "Sit down," he said. I sat. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice even though we were alone. "They are making me worse on purpose." I kept my expression steady. "What do you mean? The pills?" He pressed his lips together. "They changed something. I can feel it. Some days I can't hold a thought for more than a few seconds. But I'm not crazy." He looked at me hard. "I need you to hear that. I am not crazy." The voice from the hallway came back to me. "The dosage increase is working. I believe you," I said. He stared at me like he was waiting for the catch. "I heard them talking last night," I told him. "Your daughter and Nathan. They said the doctors increased your dosage. They're waiting for an assessment that will let her file for conservatorship." The silence that followed was one of the heaviest I've ever sat inside. Mr. Walsh looked down at his hands on the arms of the chair. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and worn in a way that had nothing to do with age. I built that company from nothing. I started with one parcel of land in 1987, and a loan I wasn't sure I could repay. Everything you see here, I built it. He paused. And she wants to take it while I'm still sitting in this chair. I thought about Lily. About the night before her first day of second grade. About how I had felt sitting at that kitchen table, knowing I didn't have enough, knowing someone had taken what I'd built too, knowing there was nothing I could do about it except keep going. I'm not going to let them do this to you, I said. He looked up. But you're going to have to trust me, I said, and we're going to have to be careful. That week, I reached out quietly to a doctor I found through a hospital referral line, someone completely outside the network of physicians Serena had been using. I brought him a list of the medications Mr. Japaro Walsh had been taking. Within a few days, he confirmed what I had already suspected. One of the prescriptions had been filled at a dosage significantly above what was clinically appropriate. It wasn't a mistake. The margin was too large to be a mistake. We made a plan. I stopped administering the altered prescription and substituted the correct dosage, verified by the outside doctor. I kept records of everything: dates, times, the original pill bottles, photographs. Within 10 days, the change was visible. Mr. Walsh's thoughts came faster. His sentences held together. He started reading again, slowly at first, then more steadily. He began asking about his company, about specific contracts, about decisions that had been made in his absence. But we had one rule that never changed. When Serena came in, none of it showed. The first time she visited after we started, he threw a pillow at the wall when she walked in and shouted at her to get out of his room. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and said to me, without looking at him, "See what I mean?" I nodded and kept my expression neutral. She left satisfied. The moment the door closed, Mr. Walsh looked at me and we both stayed completely still for a beat. And then he shook his head very slowly, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been, for just a moment, close to amusement. Nathan never stopped. Every time he appeared in the house, he found a way to remind me of what I was and what I wasn't. Once he came into the kitchen while I was preparing Mr. Walsh's afternoon medication and leaned against the counter and said, "You know, I always thought you'd end up somewhere like this." He meant it as an insult. He said it with the confidence of a man who had never once had to wonder where his next mortgage payment was coming from. I set down the medication cup and turned to face him. "Nathan," I said, "I have a lot to do right now." He smiled like I'd said something funny and walked out. I stood at the kitchen counter for a moment. Then I went back to work. 3 months passed. Serena scheduled what she called a formal assessment meeting. A date was set. She arranged for 2 physicians, a licensed clinical psychologist, her father's company's board of directors, and an estate attorney, one she had selected herself, to gather at the house on a Thursday morning in November. She seemed lighter that week, almost cheerful. Nathan was at the house every day. On the morning of the meeting, I helped Mr. Walsh dress. He was quiet. He asked me if I was ready. "Are you?" I said. He straightened in his chair. "Let's go." The living room had been arranged around the large dining table. Serena sat at one end, Nathan beside her. The physicians and psychologists took seats along one side. The board members filled in across from them. The estate attorney, not Serena's, but one Mr. Walsh had contacted me quietly 3 weeks earlier, sat at the far end with a leather portfolio in front of him. I stood against the wall near Mr. Walsh's wheelchair. Serena opened the meeting with a composed, carefully prepared statement. She described her father's behavioral deterioration, his violent outbursts, his inability to communicate clearly, his failure to engage with basic daily functions. She described it with the vocabulary of someone who had rehearsed it. She said it was time, for his safety and the security of the company, for legal authority to be transferred to her management. Nathan nodded along. He had the look of a man watching a transaction he'd already mentally completed. The psychologist looked toward Mr. Master. Walsh and said, gently, that they would need to ask him a few questions to complete their formal assessment. Mr. Walsh nodded. Can you tell me today's date? The psychologist asked. November 14th, Mr. Walsh said clearly. Thursday. A small silence. Can you tell me the name of your company and its current primary operating region? Walsh Development Group. We operate primarily in Maricopa, Pima, and Yavapai counties. We broke ground on a mixed-use project in Tempe last April. He paused. Unless that's been put on hold while I was being medicated into a fog. I'd like to know the status of that. The room went completely quiet. Serena's composure cracked first around the eyes. Dad. I've been pretending, Mr. Walsh said simply. He looked around the table without raising his voice. For the past 3 months, I've been pretending, because I needed to understand how far this was going to go. He looked at his daughter steadily, and now I do. Nathan stood up. This is. Sit down, said Mr. Walsh's attorney, standing and opening the portfolio. I have prepared documentation relevant to this meeting that the board will want to review. This includes a pharmacological analysis of Mr. Codd. Walsh's previous prescription showing intentional dosage manipulation, recorded communications obtained legally which speak directly to intent, and a signed statement from the outside physician who has been monitoring Mr. Walsh for the past 11 weeks and can speak to his current and ongoing cognitive competence. The board members leaned forward. One of them reached for the folder. Serena had gone very pale. She looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at the attorney. He had stopped looking confident. Mr. Walsh turned to me then. In front of everyone in that room, he said, this woman figured it out when no one else did. She stayed when she had every reason to leave. And she protected me when my own family was willing to let me disappear. His voice was steady. I want that on the record. Serena pushed back from the table and started to say something sharp, but 2 things happened in quick succession that stopped her. The board members had already begun conferring in low voices that did not sound like support, and the front door opened to admit 2 Scottsdale police officers who had been waiting outside. I watched Nathan's face change completely, all the ease, all the confidence. Gone. He looked for a moment like someone trying to remember who he was without it. They were escorted out together. Nathan looked at me once as he passed. He didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. After the room cleared, after the attorneys had been handed their next steps and the board members had excused themselves with serious faces and quiet words of reassurance to Mr. Daria Walsh, the house got very still. He sat in his wheelchair in the middle of the living room and looked out through the tall windows at the desert garden, the saguaros, the brittle bush, the wide pale sky of a November morning in Arizona. You could have walked out the first week, he said, without turning around. I thought about it, I said honestly. What stopped you? My daughter, I said. And then you. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want you to know something. Before any lawyers explain anything to you, before any of the formal parts begin, I want you to hear it from me directly. He turned the wheelchair to face me. You came here as an employee. You leave as someone I trust more than anyone I have known in a very long time. And I intend to make sure your life reflects that. I didn't know what to say. I'm not sure I said anything. You have a daughter, he said. I do. She's 7. What's her name? Lily. He nodded slowly. Good name. He looked back out the window. You should call her. 6 months later, Lily and I moved into a house in Tempe. A real house, not an apartment, with a backyard and a lemon tree that she immediately decided was her favorite thing she had ever owned. She started 3rd grade in a school district I had specifically researched. I was there for her first day. I took a picture of her in the driveway with her new backpack, the one she picked out herself, purple with a small embroidered cactus on the front pocket, and I stood there after she got on the bus and let myself feel it for just a minute. Nathan was charged with conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse and is awaiting trial. His attorney, from what I understand, is not cheap. Serena faces the same charges. The conservatorship petition was dismissed. Walsh Development Group is operating under proper oversight, with Mr. Tayo Walsh back in an active advisory capacity, which he seems to genuinely enjoy. And the child support order, which Nathan had been ignoring for the better part of a year, was revisited by the court as part of the broader proceedings. It is no longer being ignored. I didn't do any of it for the money. I need people to understand that. I did it because that old man looked me in the eyes and told me he wasn't crazy, and I believed him. And somewhere in that moment, I remembered what it felt like to have someone not believe me. About my marriage, about what I'd given up, about how hard I'd tried, and I decided it mattered that at least one person in his life chose to listen. Sometimes that's all it takes. Someone who stays, someone who listens, someone who doesn't leave when it gets hard. Lily came home from school her first week and told me her teacher asked everyone to share something they were proud of about their family. She said she told her class that her mom was really brave. I don't know if that's true. I'm not sure brave is the right word for doing what you have to do when there's no other choice. But I wrote it down anyway, in the little notebook I keep on my nightstand, because some things deserve to be kept. I think about Mr. Walsh a lot. Not the version of him that threw glasses across the room, but the version that looked me in the eyes on a quiet morning and said, "I'm not crazy." There was so much riding on whether I believed him, and I did. Not because I had proof yet, because I had been that person before, the one telling the truth in a room full of people who had already decided what they were going to believe. And I knew what it felt like when someone chose not to listen. What happened in that house wasn't luck. I want to be honest about that. The outcome wasn't some accident of timing or a twist of fate dropping good fortune into my lap. Every piece of it traces back to a choice someone made. Nathan chose to see a desperate woman and decide she was beneath him. Serena chose to treat her father as an obstacle instead of a person. And I chose, when I could have walked out that front door a dozen different times, to stay. That's the part people sometimes want to skip over. They want the reward without the 3 months of showing up every morning to a room where someone might throw something at you. They want the resolution without the part where you're standing in a dark hallway with your heart hammering, deciding in real time whether to act on what you just overheard. But those moments are the whole story. The ending only means something because of what it cost to get there. I wasn't particularly brave. I was a woman who needed a paycheck and ended up in a situation that required more than she expected to give. What carried me through wasn't courage in any grand sense. It was just the refusal to stop thinking, to keep asking why when something felt wrong, to trust what I could observe over what I was told to accept. I had to stay sharp in an environment that was designed to make everyone around that old man believe he was falling apart. That took a different kind of strength than I'd ever had to use before. Not the strength of endurance, though that was part of it, but the strength of attention, of paying close enough attention to notice what was actually happening versus what was being performed. And then there's the question of what kind of person you want to be when no one is watching and nothing is guaranteed. I didn't know what was going to happen when I stopped giving Mr. Walsh those altered pills. I didn't know if it would work, or if we'd get caught, or if I'd lose the job and have to explain to my mother why I was showing up at her door again. I just knew I couldn't look at that man, frightened, isolated, being hollowed out from the inside by people who called themselves his family, and do nothing. Doing nothing has its own consequences. That's something I understand now in a way I didn't before. Lily told her class her mom was brave. I wrote that down because she deserves to grow up watching what it actually looks like when someone does the right thing, not because it's easy, not because the outcome is certain, but because the alternative is becoming someone you don't recognize anymore. That, I think, is worth more than anything that house contained.